Lia, I am excited to talk about this report with you. I eat, sleep, and breathe data. And when I see something like the Grid 2025 Talent Trends Report, and I see all of the data as it relates to candidates who have used a recruiter or a staffing agency in the last little while, I'm excited about the data that your team put together. So I appreciate you sitting down and chatting with me for a little bit here.
Great. I'm glad to be here. And as you can imagine, as a research manager who does this for a living, I also eat, sleep, and breathe data. So I'm always glad to find a kindred spirit.
So before we get into some of the key findings that caught my eye, sort of tee it up for us. What is the 2025 Talent Trends Report presented by Bullhorn?
Sure. So every year, as part of our research program, we put together 2 separate grid reports. This is the one that goes out to about just under 2,800 candidates who have worked with a recruiter within the last 2 years. It is a global sample. It is admittedly skewed towards North America because that's a lot of where our business is. But we do also have talent responding from DACH, Benelux, UK&I, and Australia and New Zealand. And we do get a representative sample across a variety of sectors, commercial, professional, and healthcare. And we've also tried to age balance this to have a representative balance across the generations, which I will caveat by saying that means representative of the workforce, not evenly distributed. If you were to look into the data, you would see that boomers are a much smaller piece of the sample because they are a much smaller piece of the workforce. So this is proportionally distributed across the generations. And our intention here is to really get a sense of how one key audience for recruiters are thinking about their experience, both with recruiters and with job seeking in general, how they're thinking about technology and how they really want to engage with recruiters in their own careers, and try to give some insight for staffing firms on how they want to think about talking to, engaging with, developing, and understanding their talent pool.
And to reiterate, everybody surveyed had worked with a recruiter in what was the time frame?
The last 2 years. So they had an experience with someone in a staffing firm in the last 2 years. But that was a knockout question, a screener for our sample.
Perfect. And I love that because we're not getting theory of why would you work with a recruiter or why would you not work with a recruiter. These are people who have in the last 2 years. So we're getting good data based on, well, how can we make the experience better, faster, stronger, so that we can elevate the industry and ultimately bring the best of ourselves to the talent that we could potentially work with. So as we get started.
We did shorten the window a little bit this year. We had previously done 3 years and we moved it down to 2 because we know that the experience and the technology has been changing so rapidly. We wanted to be able to give recruiters a real sense of, like, in today's state of the state, what are the talent feeling? So we thought it was important to really have that recency bias in the data this year.
I like that. The first thing that really stuck out to me is that only 26% of Gen Z is actively using a recruiter. Walk us through that data trend.
Yeah. And again, I will say, remember, these are Gen Z who have worked with a recruiter in the last 2 years. So they're not naive about the process. They understand that recruiters are out there. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we found across the board, and this is a little sad, especially given that they're going to be in the workforce for a while, is that overall Gen Z reported, and these are self-reported results, that they were having the least satisfying experience with recruitment across the board at every stage. They reported that they were receiving the least amount of outreach from their recruiters. They were the least happy with their experience when it came to AI and automation. They were the least likely to be engaging in reskilling and upskilling programs. They were the least likely to be getting redeployment outreach with, recruiters calling them and saying, oh, you're about to end your assignment. Here's another one that we have teed up for you, or have you considered this other area of work? According to them, those were all sort of supports that, and again, I want to make clear, by least, I mean, 55 to 60% of them, depending on where we are. But it was in a lot of cases, 10 to 15 percentage points below what we saw for millennials and Gen X. So I think what I would paint a picture of, and I don't want to start off on a negative note, but the picture I would paint is that a lot of these younger people are coming out of school. They're a few years out of school. We keep hearing all of the news about how low the job activity is right now, how there's a skills mismatch for recent graduates. They are facing, lower numbers of openings, but also a huge, huge number of applicants for every single open position, in part fueled by AI in the candidate side that's letting them submit to, 100 jobs at a time. And they are also having a worse experience when they're turning to recruiters. And remember that these are younger candidates who, and now I'm going to speculate a little bit, and I am a parent of two Gen Z children. Like, they are coming out, with a different set of skills, a different sort of worldview. A lot of them aren't quite sure how to navigate the job market, or how what they've learned in college or a certificate program actually translates into a job description and work skills, and how a manager thinks about that. I think it's really an opportunity for us as an industry, because this is a generation that is craving guidance and help about how to navigate their careers, how to build those skills, how to engage with managers. They're probably the ones who can benefit the most from that sort of white glove wraparound support that we know the best of recruiting can offer, but they're the most likely to report they're not getting it and they don't know how to access it. So I guess I'm starting off a little negative, but I see it as an opportunity. Okay. There is a chance to engage these young people in a way that is compelling and will keep them in your database for literally decades to come.
I know it's going to lead you to speculate a little bit, but why do you feel that they're not getting that white glove service? Why are so many individuals in that Gen Z demo reporting that they're not getting the level of satisfaction that they require to consider working with a recruiter again?
Yeah,
Where's
so
the gap?
I'm going to emphasize a little bit. One is that I think they have different expectations. So remember that self-reported satisfaction has a lot to do with the bar that you're setting. This definitely is something we saw when we were looking at generational breakdown in terms of their experience with AI. This younger group was the least likely to report a positive experience. Again, it's still like 60% of them said it was positive. They were also the most likely to report a neutral experience. So that's as if they were like waiting to be impressed. And I think one of the things I really felt there was that you're talking about a digital native generation who are not comparing AI and recruitment to what it was 3 years ago when they were looking for a different job with a recruiter. They're comparing it to, Spotify day lists that are giving you a tailored set of recommendations based on everything you've listened to in the last 72 hours. They are comparing it to their consumer grade AI experiences everywhere else in their life. So they have higher expectations. They also, as we know, have higher expectations of what kind of support they should get, right? Like, these are kids who aren't afraid to say, I don't agree with these values, or I have a different neuropsych profile, and I should be getting some sort of recognition for that. And I think there are amazing things about this. Like, they are great advocates for themselves, but they have higher standards. And then I think some of it is, as I said, not quite knowing yet how to navigate the job market, combined with the sorts of jobs they're applying for. They're at a more entry level. So I do think, if I'm being honest and a little bit critical, that as an industry, we can sometimes treat those lower margin, lower end jobs in a slightly less tailored way than we might, on the far end, something that's in the exec search world. So I do think they probably have some real complaints there that we should pay attention to, because I think we do say, I have 50 people I could look at for this associate job. I'm not going to do this kind of hand holding the way I might if I were really trying to bring in like a fractional CIO for a Fortune 500 company. Sorry, that was a long answer, but I feel like
I love the answer. And I think it's interesting. I've said on this show that Amazon has a funny way of screwing things up for marketers. And I think what you're alluding to as well of Gen Z isn't comparing the AI that staffing firm X is using compared to staffing firm Y. They're comparing AI that they're getting in Spotify in their day-to-day as they're using AI themselves, or as they're seeing it baked into the consumer products that they're using. And they're comparing it at that level. So yes, you might be forward thinking and adopting AI in your staffing and recruiting firm, but we need to remember that this demographic is not comparing you to another staffing agency or another recruiter. They're comparing you and they're holding you to the same standard as the Goliaths in the room, right? The Amazons, the Spotifys, and those big players. And, I typically talk about Amazon having a funny way of screwing things up as relates to speed, right? Anything that I want, presumably, I can have it at my doorstep tomorrow by noon. That doesn't happen years ago. But that level of speed candidates expect when they reach out to staffing firms. They expect that level of speed as they want to hear back about where they're at in the job search process. And we're going to talk about speed in a little bit in your report here. But I think you're exactly right as relates to AI. It's we're not comparing apples to apples. We're comparing apples to something wildly different.
Yep. And I'm just as guilty, right? Like if I have to order something not on Amazon because it's a specialty item, I'm like, a week? What do you mean I have to wait a week? And
Yeah.
I'm Gen X. Like I remember having to like put things in the mail, right? And yet I still had my standards reset to a level that, Amazon has made me a very different kind of consumer. And I do believe that Gen Z are a different kind of consumer of the services we have to offer. I will say, I think it's a really good opportunity, and we'll talk a little bit about someone who's starting off in the industry. It's a good opportunity to channel Gen Z recruiters as staff and to get people to sort of, I'm a big fan of the idea of pairing a younger recruiter with a more senior recruiter, because I believe that younger recruiters come in with a sense of these expectations, an understanding of their generation, a different sense of the market, how you need to be seeing and hearing and understanding candidates. But they do come in often without some of those fundamental relational skills like making phone calls, shaking hands, going out to conferences. And the more we get AI to be building the perfect Boolean search with a single prompt, the less you're going to need the people who know how to do that. And the more you're going to have to go back to fundamentals. I'm now skipping ahead to some other questions, but I believe that one of the things I would say to someone starting off these days in staffing is go back to fundamentals of human connections, of building your network, of really figuring out how to be relational. And I think there is huge potential for intergenerational mentorship within the staffing industry to leverage all of those strengths and come out as a really unstoppable white glove candidate and client focused set of people, a team who really is going to knock it out of the park on business development, client upselling, candidate engagement, because you're going to be able to tie together that intuition, understanding, and tech savviness of the younger recruiters with the relational experience of the older recruiters who have also seen the ups and downs of the labor market and understand, what the signs are and where you still find pockets of success. If firms can marry those up, they're going to be completely unbeatable.
Yeah, I had Keely Flood on a couple episodes ago, and the whole conversation was around how success comes from mastering and winning the boring basics. That we can be as forward thinking as possible, but we first need to master the boring basics. And that's why so many people fail in their day to day, whether it's their personal or careers, whatever it might be, because we don't master and win the boring basics because they're boring basics, but you have to win those first. And I love what you're alluding to there as well. Lia, I want to get your thoughts on AI eliminating the application black hole, and specifically the data point that said 45% of candidates think that AI will fix the black hole problem. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting when you look at a few of the different data points put together, because what we saw over the last several years, but especially this year, is that when candidates talked about why they stopped working with a recruiter or what led to their dissatisfaction, because we delved a lot into satisfaction this year, and we found that unfortunately across the board, it's declining for pretty much all our candidates compared to last year and every stage of the recruitment process. So we tried to dig a little bit deeper and find out why. And what you see is that a lot of it has to do with speed, responsiveness, clunky processes, not knowing where you stand in the process. And yet at the same time, we saw candidates overwhelmingly say, oh, chatbots got back to me right away. The voice screening agent meant that I could do this at any time, immediately. I could really demonstrate my skills. I moved through the funnel very quickly. It was glaringly obvious in the data that there is a sense of shouting into the void right now when you're applying blindly online and through recruiters. But this immediate feedback loop, just the satisfaction, right? We all love this, right? You send something, you post a review and you love it when, the restaurant owner gets back to you and says, thank you, right? Like, I mean, it's undeniable. We all like getting that feedback and that approbation.
Yeah.
And that was all over this data when it came to AI overall, to chatbots, to voice screening agents. We went in not knowing if candidates were going to show a lot of discomfort or feel like it was a necessary evil. And what we saw across the board was no, they were like, I am so glad I got an answer and you moved me quickly through. I will put in a caveat, and some of this came out especially in the qualitative research, which is that everyone wants that in the beginning and then to move to a person. No one, candidates or Bullhorn, is advocating, for a fully AI agentic hiring process. But what people want is to know immediately that someone has heard them, to hear back really quickly on whether or not they're even in the running and know where they stand, have someone screen them for their skills, and then get them really, really quickly to a person who's going to talk to them about fit and interview prep and what the process is, and get them to the questions that aren't the boring basics of the knockout questions. What's your salary requirements, your education? Do you know this programming language? So one of the things that we found in this was that everyone loved it at the top of the funnel because it sped their way to an actual human being. And again, I'll go back to this sense of like, I think there is a return to the fundamentals of recruiting that in the best of worlds, AI is really going to enable, which is getting to those things that made most of us want to get into this people business to begin with. But candidates are completely on board with AI, helping them skip to that point.
Did your data or has any other research that you've conducted show you how fast someone wants to be responded to?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of information on communication preferences and placement preferences. And honestly, when it comes to that initial communication that they have received your resume, they want it to be basically instantaneous. They want it to look like the confirmation of your Amazon order, which frankly is good news because we're delivering that. Like almost everyone in recruiting right now has the auto email that comes back. They want then within a week to hear a response about where they are in the process. It varies a little bit, between like a light industrial warehouse job versus someone who knows they're going out for, a middle manager role, but across the board, that's about where you are. And everyone working with a recruiter overwhelmingly wants to be placed in 20 days or less if they possibly can be. And that's the expectation. And some of the data we do when we did the industry trends report, we find that level of communication is where candidates want it to be for the most part, like how often they're getting outreach, but they're not necessarily getting the first touch quite as quickly as they would like to. And that's anecdotal from some of my qualitative research.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know that instantaneous, you purchased item, here's when you can expect it. Sort of, Domino's did it, right? You order a pizza and then they had the pizza tracker, right? So now Brad's putting the pizza in the oven. Now it's going to be in the delivery car because now Brad's driving it to your house. Even DoorDash, I know exactly when my food is going to show up down to the minute. I know that the driver is going to be outside my house with my order and when it's going to be there. And I think too often, and this is going to speak to the next data point that I want to bring up, we inadvertently send candidates into a black hole because we are doing things behind the scenes, but we're not educating them on where we're at, or we don't have the systems in place that are automatically educating the candidate with where they're at in the process. We're doing things. We're passing papers around. We're reviewing things. We're looking at resumes. We're screening. We're doing whatever it takes, but we're not sharing that with the candidate. And that's ultimately all that matters because, to your data set here, 54% of candidates who gave up working with a recruiter did so because the process were too slow or lacked communication.
Yep, because they didn't know where they stood. And I think, to your point, like we're constantly working, so it feels like we're busy and we're making progress. I think, and this may sound way too basic, but too often we forget that this is really important to candidates, right? This is their livelihoods. In some cases, they're actually unemployed and really desperate to get a job. We are seeing, back when the BLS was still reporting out data before the government shut down, we were seeing that long-term unemployment is at a level that we haven't seen for years and years and years. So you have people out there who have been looking for work for 6 months, 8 months, a year, and this is existential for them. And even though we're working and we are, like, the recruiters are working very hard, and that's also evidenced in a lot of this and a lot of the other data that we collect. It's easy sometimes to forget that 48 hours waiting when you have your whole career and identity on the line is a big thing. And it feels bad. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. So if we can just give them a little ping that's like, you've moved from initial screening to, matching, or like anything. Yeah. Like a DoorDash, like your Uber, where you're watching your Uber literally make the turn onto your street. Maybe we don't get quite to that level of granularity, but anything that we can do, and it can be automated, right? Like the candidates, you can see in this data and how open they are to working with AI. They don't care if it's you, Brad, calling them personally and saying, I got your resume. I'm looking at it right now. We should be back to you within a week. That can be an automated email. That can be a chatbot reaching back out. They just want to feel like they're getting some sort of feedback and communication on a regular basis. They want, even when they've been placed in a job, they want their recruiters to reach out once a week or more, even while they're on the job, to check in with them, to talk to them about their next assignment, to see how it's going. They really, really crave that feedback loop and that level of communication. And I'll just say again, I think we have to remember this is people's lives, right? It really matters to them.
Hey, it's Brad taking a quick break to tell you about my friends at Benefits in a Card. Let's face it, traditional benefits don't work for temporary employees. They're expensive, confusing, and often go unused. That's where Benefits in a Card comes in. For 30 years, they've delivered benefit plans tailored to the staffing industry. With over 140 unique plans offering immediate coverage and unique perks, including free RX, they help reduce turnover, improve ACA compliance, and give your workforce something to feel good about. Want to give your staffing firm a real edge? Start with my friends at Benefits in a Card. To learn more, visit benefitsinacard.com. That's benefitsinacard.com. All right, let's get back to the show. It does, right? I'm thinking through somebody who's been out of work for 6 months or so, and the mortgage is due on the 15th. And I already have shown in the data that Gen Z, I don't want to work with a recruiter, so I'm probably already down on my luck because I haven't been able to get a job myself in the last 6 months. So now I'm finally giving a recruiter a chance, right? Because I've exhausted what presumably is all of my other options, and now they're still not getting back to me. And it's frustrating to think about because at the end of the day, people just want to be heard. People want to be communicated with. And Lia, I think you touched on it well. We're working, right? I know how busy the industry is, but at the end of the day, I just want to be heard. I, the candidate, want to know where I'm at in the process because candidly, I don't care about the other candidates in the process. I care about me and whether or not I can pay my bills at the end of the month.
Yeah, 100%. And, that's always been the way the candidate experience is. And I think, it's also sometimes hard to remember how to deliver that full experience and put yourself in the candidate's shoes in a market like we have now where job orders are down and we have, we are still in the weird oxymoronic situation where we seem to have talent shortages and job shortages at the same time, which we've been in for about 3 years now. But you are still seeing a huge bump in the number of applications. And it's easy as a recruiter to get overwhelmed and to just feel frustrated with the task, right? To treat it like the task of 300 or 400 or 500 resumes that have come in for a single job and not remember that every one of those is a person. And to your point, a person who may have been looking for 6 months or might have, a kid in college or a rent check due. And I know I come from a tech company, so I'm obviously going to, slant a little bit towards that view of the world. But I do think that the more we can implement technology and AI at the top of the funnel to winnow that down, even if the communication they're getting is, this isn't a good fit for you, like that also has value. And the faster you can get them to that so they can be moving on and continuing their job search. I also would love to see us move to the point where AI can then help them understand why, right? Like recruiters understandably do not have a lot of time to talk to, maybe they're talking to silver medalists, but they can't be talking to all of the 400 candidates who didn't even make it to the next stage of screening. But I would love to see a day when an AI agent can reach out or a chatbot could be like, hey, here are like the 3 gaps that you had, or here are the 4 or 5 different kinds of roles that actually might be a better fit for you. I think that AI will free recruiters up to do more of that personally when they have the people who are in that mid-funnel part of conversion. But I would love in an ideal world to see AI do at least some version of that at the top of the funnel. Hey, Brad, you applied for this sales associate job. I actually think you're lacking, a couple of years of face-to-face client-facing experience, but I do see that you have the back-end skills. I'd recommend that you either, move into a customer success role to get that face-to-face experience, or consider being in like an analytics role or an insights role, right? Like, how valuable would that be?
Yeah.
Again, if we go back to Gen Z, who don't know a lot of times what job titles even mean because they haven't worked in a lot of those roles, how valuable could that be? If you could do the same thing I know recruiters are doing with the people they get to talk to, if we could have AI replicate that at whatever superficial level, why wouldn't you then work with a recruiter, right? And that's an AI benefit that I don't believe you're ever going to get from, from just an Indeed hire or a LinkedIn hiring assistant. Like, I know they're doing a lot of work, but there is a value that we have in the recruitment industry that cannot be replicated. And I think you see that one of the conclusions in the report was, yes, we're losing out to job boards, but we also provide something that they can't. And what we need to do is a better job of demonstrating that value, telling that story. And when you do that well, you do see candidate loyalty go through the roof. Like, sometimes you're looking at candidate loyalty of over 90% when they're engaging in reskilling programs, or when you're helping a contractor get all the hours that they want. Because a lot of times they're underemployed, and recruiters can help them get what they need to be able to make their rent. When you do that, when you engage with them, they will stay with you for a really long time, and they will be loyal. They also will tell their friends. And when you look into the data, we see that it's still that by far the greatest reason that people choose the individual recruiter that they work with is because of their past experience or reviews or referrals. So the more you can demonstrate that differentiation, the things that a job board is never ever going to be able to do, the better. So why not have some of that powered at the beginning by AI saying, hey, Brad, here are the next 3 things you might want to consider in your career, or here's a course you might want to take because this would look great and fill in this gap on your resume. I may be like totally fantasizing. This may be Recruitment 5.0, but that's where I'd love to see us go.
It's probably not that far away, to be honest with you. And I think that's the career coach that everyone is looking for and everyone needs. And that's the differentiation between, the 66% of people who would rather apply through a job board. They're not going to get that if they're not working with a recruiter, right? The recruiter, like you said, the silver medalists, and I love that analogy. Those are the people that are getting coached to the next stage of the process, right? Those are your you didn't get the job this time, but you're so close. But there are so many other that fall into a gap of, well, what's wrong with me then? Like, why not me? Because in my mind, I think I got all of this, but if you're not relaying that to me, what's so bad about me? What's wrong? And I love the thought of having, okay, well, hey, you weren't qualified for here, but here's some other options. Oh, and by the way, I could get you in a conversation with a hiring manager in this role tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. I want to talk about voice agents because we started going down that path for a little bit, and this data actually shocked me a little bit because let me just read the number first, and then I'll tell you why it shocked me. So the data was specifically 88% of candidates said their voice agent interview was as good as or better than talking to a person. I didn't think we were there yet. I did not think we were to a point yet where voice agents were going to be driving such positivity in terms of 88%. I'm actually going to read it again to make sure I got it right and that the listener gets it for those of you who are listening on audio version. 88% of candidates said their voice agent interview was as good as or better than talking to a person. Walk us through that, Lia.
So I give a little bit of framing here, which is that, again, this is their experience with a voice agent. So this isn't hypothetical. One of the things I'm most excited about this year is that last year we were asking a lot of questions about how comfortable would you be? Would this work for you? And this year we actually have the population, the sample size to be able to say, what was it like? What was the reality of it? So it's interesting to note, first of all, that a little fewer than half of the respondents had already had the opportunity to work with a voice agent who did a screening interview for them. So that was the first thing that we were wondering, was how many people have even already had this experience, and across the board and across all the samples and regardless of sector, already half the candidates have. So that also surprised me. I was like, great, like we have made inroads where I wasn't sure where we would be. And we then dug a little bit deeper. We also asked people what it is that they like the best about the AI voice agent and why they were giving these ratings. And it was surprising because they rated them both as natural and human, that we've gotten to the point where they weren't like, oh God, this is an impossibly awkward experience. It makes me feel like I'm talking to a robot. They were like, oh, it's actually pretty good. And then the next thing that they noted was that it actually gave them a really good opportunity to demonstrate their skills, experience, and their fit for the job. And again, so as a researcher, part of what I do is speculate. Like I'm always like, what's the next research question? So I'm going to put a hypothesis out there, which is that in some ways, as great as the human experience is, and it should be later in the process when you really want to get at things like fit and team dynamic and management styles and communication styles, we're inconsistent, right? Like, and a lot of times you have a hiring manager, depending on the role, who maybe doesn't do that work. Right? But you can program a voice agent to actually know everything about JSON programming, right? Like, 'cause a lot of times you might have an IT manager who's like, I specialize in the other things. I need to get someone who specializes in this. And they're asking the questions that they think are the right questions, but it may not be their area of expertise. You can program a voice agent to have that expertise and to ask not just the questions that are relevant, but the questions that you know based on what's been fed into the LLM in the past have identified candidates who've been successful in the role, who've stayed, who've ended up getting hired, who've ended up accepting the job. All of that can be behind those interview questions. And what we see in this data is that the candidates are saying, oh, actually, it was great because that follow-up question was technically or procedurally exactly what I would have wanted to demonstrate next. It actually let me be more thorough in my explanation of why I'm a good fit. And that's, this is one of those things where like, I'm not an advocate for removing people from the process, but sometimes the consistency of a voice agent that knows exactly what to ask and asks it again and again and has relevant follow-ups and then is able to, and this is more for the recruiter, comprehensively pull that all together into an assessment that lets you compare candidates apples to apples. Like that's an invaluable tool for candidates, recruiters, and clients, right? Like that gets you where you need to be. I was just happy to see that the candidates are already feeling it. Like they see the value as well.
I didn't think we were there yet. And maybe I just don't know that I have, but I don't think I've interacted with that many voice agents yet in Buffalo, New York. And maybe it's just because I don't use the phone too much. Maybe that's just my own consumer habits. Maybe I just don't know who I'm talking to on the other end of that call.
Or maybe it is a voice agent.
Exactly right. And maybe that's just the case. And I know they're getting good. I've seen some really good demos and some, examples from throughout the industry. But to know that 88% of candidates said that it was as good as or better than talking to a person is incredibly reassuring. I want to talk about AI increasing.
Get better, right? That's my opinion. Like they're only going to get better in the next few years.
For sure. For sure. We are just at the very tip of the iceberg as it relates to AI usage, consumption, and integration. I mean, when we think about where we're at right now, go ahead, please.
I will share one interesting thing was that when we broke that down by gender, you'll see that there is a little bit of a difference that, candidates who identify as female are a little less likely to rate it as sounding human and natural and a little more likely to want, a more human connection. The candidates who identified as male were much more likely to be like, yeah, that was just as good as talking to a person. It's small, but it was statistically significant. And, I don't want to get into a whole bunch of gender analysis, but it's just worth pointing out that was a slightly interesting deviation that we saw.
Very good. I want to talk about candidate satisfaction because this page in the report maybe caught my attention most. Total satisfaction is declining throughout the recruitment process. There's another bullet point that goes on to say candidate satisfaction declined in every area in the last year. Satisfaction with speed and responsiveness went down 20%. I think we're not to be all doom and gloom, but we were talking quite a bit now for the last half hour or so about a lot of data of where the industry could be better, where we could improve, where we could strengthen our habits and our procedures. Talk to us specifically about candidate satisfaction declining, the data that you found, and then maybe what we can do about it.
Yeah, I think, it was alarming. And this is why we try to track year over year trends, right? Because you could look at it and be like, oh, well, around 70% of candidates, 65, 70% of candidates are satisfied with communication, with speed and responsiveness, with the job fit that we're demonstrating for them. But I would argue that 2/3 to 70% is probably not actually as high as we would want it to be. And when you compare it to numbers from the previous year that were at least 10%, if not 20% higher, like that's alarming, right? That's not the trend we want to see. And we certainly wouldn't want to see it continue in that direction. So I think it's worth turning our attention to it. Again, I will say, I always, as a researcher, have the question about expectations. Like speed and responsiveness saw the biggest decline in satisfaction. Is that because recruiters are responding less quickly? Or is it because the expectations on the candidate side vis-a-vis everything else in the world have gone up? And I think it's probably a little of column A and a little of column B. But even if it's about expectations, we need to know that as an industry. Expectations are rising among the talent about the accuracy of the jobs that you present. We found that for those candidates who weren't satisfied with job fit, 56% of them said it was because the recruiter didn't understand what they were looking for and what a good job fit would be. So like that is the core of what we're doing as an industry, right? We're meant to be able to say, hey, we know better than you do where you're going to fit into this ecosystem of work. So that's a big number. I mean, admittedly, that's of the 30-40% who weren't satisfied with that. So you are looking at a disgruntled piece of the population, but I think it's worth understanding when things broke, what is it that broke? And overwhelmingly what we saw was that it was about speed and communication, which I think we've talked a lot about, and the need to let technology free us up to do that, to lean into technology. The other thing that we saw was just complicated, opaque processes. People being like, I didn't know where I stood. I didn't know how to get paid. The onboarding system was complicated. It was too many clicks for me to get to the person. I didn't know what the next stage was. I didn't know where I stood. And again, I would say these are fixable problems. These aren't even hard to fix problems. There are a lot of tools out there. Your ATS probably already has a lot of things that can help you address these things. AI is the new shiny object, and I am very enthusiastic about it. But old school recruitment automation has ways to address a lot of these concerns, certainly the ones around like onboarding and pay cards and, just notifications of where you stand in the process, telling you what the next step is. Oh, you made it through this screening. You did the voice agent. You'll hear within 10 days. The next step is we schedule an interview with the hiring man, like whatever it is. And overwhelmingly, people were like, it's too complicated. It's too many clicks. These processes are cumbersome. I don't understand them. We need to be thinking about, this is going to sound really basic, and I don't mean to suggest recruiters don't do this, but like, we just need to think about it from their perspective. You need to put yourself in the shoes of a recruiter at least a couple of times a year. Every recruiter should be like applying for a job in their own system and go through the whole thing and see what that feels like and how frustrated they get. Where's the point where it starts to make them crazy? That's what you need to go and fix, right? That's what you should look at. Do that as often as you can. And I think it's going to make a big difference.
You are preaching from my Bible over here. I have said now on stage all year, I have a talk that I've delivered of what the best staffing and recruiting firms do differently. And one of my key talks is about the candidate experience. And it's that putting the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae, right? The ice cream sundae is fine as is, but when you drop a cherry on top of that ice cream sundae and you take it to that wow status, that you didn't have to do that for me status, that's when everything changes. And I challenge the audience every time I'm speaking in person or if I'm on a webinar, I challenge the audience to go through their own candidate experience and apply to a job and feel the friction that a candidate is feeling. And then I also challenge them to sit down with somebody that they love, a spouse, a friend, a family member, one of their children, whatever it might be, and don't watch them type on their keyboard and go through the process. Watch their body language. When do they start to wipe their brow? When do they lock their feet around a chair because they're trying to ground themselves? Are they getting fidgety? Are they getting anxious because of the process that they're going through? And friends, if someone that you know and love is getting frustrated about your candidate process, they're getting frustrated about your application process. Again, this is someone you know, like, trust, love. If they're getting frustrated, what do you think is happening to a candidate who doesn't know who you are, who already, because of the data we're seeing, doesn't really want to work with you in the first place? Because we're seeing different challenges, right? They're yes, maybe they want to work with you, but maybe some, okay? Skeptical is a better way to put that. I was a little more blunt because I was getting fired up about the topic.
I'll say it's interesting you mentioned that because over this last year, my 20-year-old took a year off of college and was trying to find a job, find a job, without a college degree, obviously, because you had left for a year without a lot of practical job skills, so applying to many, many entry-level positions. And I sat with her and had to walk her through like how to put together a resume, how to go through an Indeed application, how to deal with a chatbot screening. And she was lost and frustrated and several times had to get up and leave the computer. It was often all we could do to get through one. And I had to say to her, and this was a big wake-up call for a 20-year-old, like, with this level of job, you really need to be applying to 40, 50, 100 of these before you're going to get a bite. That's the other thing I would say, multiply this out beyond one experience of going through the application process. She was struggling to keep her focus and understand all the steps and keep her patience to do it once. And then when I said, you're going to have to do this 30 more times this week, like, it was like her face fell and she was completely overwhelmed and she basically wanted to go back to bed. She's going to hate now that I'm sharing this on a podcast, but I'm assuming no one in her college class is going to listen to this. No offense, but
I'm going to make sure I send it to all of them.
But when you multiply that out, when you think about someone, especially who's applying for entry level, even professional entry level jobs, they're going to do this again and again and again and again. So think about them, throwing their hands up, wrapping their legs around the chair, not once, but 30 times. Yeah. And then think about what that candidate experience is like and how you would feel if you were in that spot.
And there's such an opportunity for our industry to be the knight in shining armor there that can help, right? So not only go through your process, but go through your competitors' processes, go through other staffing firms' processes in your area and see how much friction there is there. How can you be better, faster, stronger? Just because you're sort of secret shopping what the competition is doing or what your own process is like. How can you create a level of process that is faster, that has more communication, that has better speed, that integrates voice agents, it integrates AI, that enables the candidate to do things how they want to do it on their time so that they're not frustrated and that they're not skeptical of working with you, but that they do want to work with you and they want to tell all their friends to work with you.
And that makes voice agents and chatbots feel like an enabler, not a blocker. Because I do think we need to be careful about where we put them in the process and exactly how far we go through the experience with technology taking the forefront. Because I think people love it, but they still want that white glove service, that special touch, that human connection. And one of the things I actually think is going to be the really interesting challenge for recruitment over the next 2 years is to find that sweet spot. Because I think we're a little hit or miss at it right now. You still hear people say, I'm happy to have an answer from a chatbot, but like, it went too far, or it was too long before I got to a person, or I never heard from anyone. I wish there'd been a chatbot. We have work to do in really calibrating by role, by industry, by target audience within the talent pool, because they're going to have different understanding and different expectations. Like, where do you shift that slide bar, right, of human versus tech? And I do think it's interesting, again, not to always go back to it, the generational thing, but what we saw was that, Gen X, who are still a big core part of the workforce, but who obviously remember a pre-technology era of working, were the most likely to be like, I'm happy to have AI in the process. They were the most likely to rate it as a positive experience. They really just wanted whatever got them where they needed to be, right? This was utilitarian for them. So the way you engage with someone who just wants whatever is going to work is different than how you engage with someone who's like, I want this to be an interactive consumer grade experience. Like, you need to be understanding who your audience is and then meeting them where they are. All the more so because at some point this market will turn and it will be, it will no longer be a hirer's market. It will be a candidate's market. We all know this is cyclical. Sometime while we're all in this industry, that will happen. And you will thank your past self for having done that secret shopping, for having really delved into the candidate experience before you were desperate for candidates.
Lia, we ran through a lot of numbers. We ran through a lot of fantastic data. I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything in the report that your team uncovered, that you uncovered, that spoke to you that we didn't get a chance to talk about or that I didn't ask about?
I think one thing I would say, continuing on the topic of satisfaction, and I want to end sort of on a positive note, which is that what we did find is that satisfaction at every stage had an impact. It made a difference in loyalty, in, the way they felt they were being treated. So, I mean, the hard side of that is you really need to nail it all the way throughout. There's definitely a recency bias. So like, if you get them the right job, but their onboarding experience is terrible and they don't get paid for a month and a half, like, they're still going to ding you on it in your reviews and they're not going to go back to you. But the good news is that even small increases in satisfaction at any one of those stages has pretty much an equal impact on their loyalty and willingness to work with you again and refer you. So, maybe focus on some of those like middle office functions that we tend to forget because we're thinking so much about search and match, right? That we're thinking, how do you deploy AI as a voice agent? And I'm obviously a proponent of that, but like, think about the ways that you can automate some of your middle office function, because those have just as big an impact on candidate satisfaction and loyalty as the other stages of the recruitment process. I think the only other thing I would say is that my big takeaway in this, and I touched on this a little bit, is that the way we compete with job boards is to really know ourselves, to know what our differentiators are. This is, if I were to say to someone, like, if you were going to start a staffing firm right now in this industry, like, what is my piece of advice for you? I would say, know yourself. Because I think gone are the days of just the big generic staffing firm of like, I place clerical people in offices and executives and nurses. It's not just specializing by sector. It's this real niche specialization. You're even hearing like the Adecos and the Manpowers of the world talk about specialization at scale.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to go deep and narrow if you need to. I don't want to, it's not the like inch deep, mile wide anymore. It's the opposite. Going deep is what is going to allow you to have more vertical integration. So you can be bringing in, consulting, project management, upskilling, reskilling, outsourcing centers, contingency planning, succession planning. All of this benefits your clients and your candidates. And the way you're really going to compete at that is to know exactly where you can compete that no one else can. And I mean really specifically, like, I'm seeing really interesting work being done around things like workforce interruption planning in the healthcare industry for when there's a nursing strike, or AI compliance training for attorneys to help them, to help build the talent pool that is going to be necessary in the next 6 months to 3 years. So what I see in this data, and combined with the other research I do, is really know how to set yourself apart. That is not only how you're going to compete in a down market, it's how you're going to delight and retain candidates. It's also how you're going to make sure that deploying AI makes you stand out rather than making you seem like everyone else. Because there is always the danger that AI becomes table stakes. And the only way that you continue to use it in a way that gives you an advantage with the candidates and the clients is to really know what is your special sauce and infuse that into your AI-driven practices, while at the same time balancing it with the human flavor that is your other special sauce. Know exactly who you are and where you stand in the market, and then just double down and vertically integrate.
It's fantastic stuff, Lia. Before I get you to our rapid fire round, I want to give you the floor to share a little bit about yourself and Bullhorn.
Sure. So I'm the senior research manager at Bullhorn. I've been here for about 2.5 years now, but this is my second or third job now doing this sort of research, thought leadership research within a SaaS company. So I've done this in health tech. I'm actually because I needed one more thing on my plate. I'm almost done with my master's in public health at Boston University with a focus on health equity. So I do a lot of research in a lot of different areas, and data is my jam, as I've already said. And one of the things I really like about working at Bullhorn, I think most of your listeners will be familiar with us. We are the industry leader in, ATS and a lot of other related fields, but I really enjoy working there because it's this constant spirit of innovation, like because people are excited about it, right? Like Bullhorn isn't drilling down on AI because we're like, well, got to keep up or got to make sure we meet the market. It's because we have people literally in the C-suite who are like, I want nothing more than to stay up until 3 a.m. tinkering with this voice agent to make it exactly the best ever. And I want my kids to play with it because it's such a great tool. And I love the passion about putting the world to work. So it's a great place to work that I hope is also having the benefit of creating some great tools for the industry.
And if somebody wants to get their hands on the Grid Talent Trends Report for 2025, where can they go?
They can go to the Bullhorn website and search under resources. You'll find it in our new research section. I'll also say, and this is a sneak preview, literally as of 6 days from now, we're launching a new consolidated research site called Bullhorn Insights. It's going to be the new home of all of the grid research, as well as our staffing indicator and some very exciting new real-time trending data that's being pulled from the aggregated information from our ATS as well as from our Market IQ product that pulls all the job openings across the entire US market that are posted, deduplicates them, and then gives a sense of and runs it through AI to figure out what the trends are. So you can find the grid report in that new section in Bullhorn Insights, as well as of next Tuesday, a lot of other interesting insights that are being shared for the first time publicly. So I'd encourage people to go to that.
Perfect. And our quick rapid fire round, one book that has fundamentally changed your life.
Hey, it's Brad taking a short break to tell you about an offer exclusive to listeners of Take the Stage. 30 minutes of strategic marketing consultation with me, completely free. Hey, whether you're looking to drive more sales or more job applications, I want to help. Visit bit.ly/stage offer. Pick a time that works best for you. That's it. Again, whether you want to drive more applications or more job orders, I want to help. That's bit.ly/stage offer. All right, let's get back to the show.
So I'm going to give a non-businessy answer. I'm sure there are people who are like, I read, Michael Porter's 5 Forces. But I would say when I was thinking about this, I remember 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez really changing my view of the world and my view of storytelling when I first read it as a junior in high school. It was part of a whole unit on Latin American magic realism. And it was where I started to think differently about narrative. I had been a typical American high school student who'd been taught to write an essay with an introduction, 3 paragraphs that supported and a conclusion. And it has such a discursive, recursive narrative structure that is still clear and compelling and evocative. It made me think differently about how you can convey information, how you can tell a story. And because again, I was an American high school student in the 90s. I'd read a lot of American and English literature. So it also broadened my horizons to really think about a different culture or a different set of experiences and how that is reflected in narrative style, in character, in history, and led me to then do a lot of work thinking about the legacy of colonialism in Latin America and what that looks like. But I think really more than anything, and I believe that part of my job is to help data tell a story. I don't think it's just about getting the numbers. It's about figuring out what the numbers mean and why that matters to you. And that's a book that made me really blow up my sense of how you tell a good story and how many different ways there are to do that, depending on who you're speaking to.
I appreciate that. That has not been mentioned yet on this show. So, and as every listener knows, as much as we're giving you something to help with your library, we're really just building my own over here.
Right.
So I appreciate the recommendation. And one piece of advice that you would give to somebody just starting in staffing and recruiting, what are you going to tell them?
I feel like I've touched on some of these, but I'm going to go back to the fundamentals. And I do think, assuming that this is a younger person going into the industry, seek out advice, learn from others, think about the basic relational pieces, you know, talk to somebody who remembers a Rolodex and why it was so important to have this sort of built-in network of people at your fingertips. Obviously, do it in your own way, apply technology to it. I am not a technophobe or a Luddite, but go back to the sense of, you know, how do I connect with people and how do I connect with people in a way that is unique to me? Because I think that's what makes our A-player recruiters, right? That ability to connect and to do it in a way that only Brad could, right? Like I'm thinking, forgive me, I've mentioned I have Gen Z kids. My younger one is literally in the middle of college application season right now, which is a daunting prospect. And one of the things we've been talking about as he writes his college essay is it doesn't just need to be a good essay. It doesn't need to just check all the boxes. It needs to be something that only you could write. It needs to have you leap off the page. And I genuinely believe that our best recruiters are the ones who find a way to use all the tools, all the tips, everything that they're being taught, but then bring themselves to the process in a way that only they can. So know what you are uniquely qualified for in terms of connection, and then let it go, let it free, like really lean into it. And I think that's how you're going to be not only a good recruiter, but a satisfied and happy and fulfilled recruiter.
Lia, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and painting a picture for what the data means, right? I know, and you alluded to it perfectly, I think, in the book that you suggested, right? The telling the story behind the data matters. I had a fantastic time talking to you. As long as you and the Bullhorn team keep putting out good data and get great reports, you're welcome back anytime to talk about those data and stories. So I genuinely appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. This was a ton of fun, and I'd come back anytime.